Imagine this, you've built an empire, mansions, yachts, private jets, but one lawsuit, one, could make it all vanish overnight. Sounds crazy, right? Well, it happens. And if you don't know how to protect yourself, it might just happen to you. Welcome to the world of asset protection. And the strategies that you're about to hear could be the difference between you keeping everything that you've earned and losing it all in a courtroom battle. And I should know, I'm the CEO of Asset Protection Planners, the nation's largest asset protection firm. So stay tuned, because by the end of this video, you'll know exactly how the wealthiest people in the world protect their assets. And trust me, it's not what you think. Let me tell you a story. Before we met, a friend of mine, let's call him David, had it all. A tech millionaire with homes in California and New York. He thought his success meant that he was untouchable. But one unexpected lawsuit hit, and within months, he was fighting to keep his homes. The court froze his bank accounts. His assets were wide open for the taking. And David didn't have a proper asset protection plan in place. The result? He lost millions. Now let's pause for a second. According to the American Bar Association, nearly 40 million lawsuits are filed in the U.S. every year. The higher your net worth, the bigger the target on your back. In fact, Forbes recently noted that high net worth individuals are 10 times more likely to be sued than the average person. If you're a business owner, entrepreneur, or investor, the risk only multiplies. So what is asset protection? Think of it like an invisible shield. Asset protection is all about legal strategies that separate your wealth from your personal liabilities. But here's the thing. It's not about hiding your money or avoiding taxes. That's illegal. Instead, it's about building legal barriers so creditors and lawsuits can't reach your hard-earned assets. And here's how you do it. The center of a high net worth asset protection plan is an asset protection trust. And when it comes to asset protection trusts, we have two choices. There are domestic trusts and there are offshore trusts. Domestic trusts are fairly new, but the challenge is, in my 33 years of experience, is that I've seen domestic trusts penetrated again and again. And the reason, there are increasing theories of legal liability. And an asset protection trust based in the U.S. is subject to U.S. court orders and doesn't have the protection that an international trust does with an international law firm trustee. I'll talk about that in a bit. Now, if you're a high net worth individual, you're going to want to have an international asset protection trust. And the most powerful offshore asset protection trusts are in the Cook Islands, Belize, and Nevis. The Cook Islands is down south of Hawaii. It's in the South Pacific. It's part of New Zealand. And if you look up the annual report by Transparency International called the Global Corruption Perceptions Index, you'll see the #1 most trusted jurisdiction over the years is New Zealand, and Cook Islands is part of New Zealand. So Cook Islands has the most powerful asset protection trust in the world, in combination with being the most trusted jurisdiction in the world. Second is the Caribbean island of Nevis, along with Belize down in Central America. Those three jurisdictions have the most powerful asset protection trust, headed up by, in my opinion, the Cook Islands. In fact, my team and I have established more Cook Islands trusts than anybody in the world. And what we do, as you'll see on other videos, is we stick an international LLC, usually that is in the Cook Islands, and we make you the manager of that LLC and the initial signatory on the bank account. Now, when the legal attack comes, and this only needs to be temporary, you can have our law firm trustee company in the Cook Islands step in as manager of the LLC. So when the U.S. courts say, give me the money, our international law firm says, sorry, you don't have jurisdiction down here. We don't need to comply. Now, you're not in contempt because you are complying with the judge's orders, but our international law firm trustee is not subject to those orders. Now, inside the LLC, that's where we house your bank account. The trust has beneficiaries. That can be you and your spouse and children. So when you and your spouse pass away, your kids get your money. If you want an extra safety net, you can have a protector that oversees the trustee. That's an optional position. So let's talk about what you do with your domestic assets. For your personal residence here, we're going to put that into a land trust so you have privacy of ownership. That way your name doesn't appear in the public records. For a high net worth individual, if somebody looks in the public records, you don't want people to know where you live. So we put your personal residence in a land trust. Now, if you live in a state like Florida or Texas, you don't need to do this because you have 100% homestead protection protection on your home to a certain lot size. Outside of those states, what we'll do is we'll take the LLC that's inside of your offshore trust that we just talked about, and we'll record an equity stripping line of credit mortgage. So there's no payments that you have to make, and there's no money changing hands initially. It's simply a line of credit payable to your international LLC. Now, if needed, we have a third-party lender who can purchase this lien against your property and put the proceeds into your international trust so that the equity is stripped out of your home and there's nothing left to take. Now, for rental property, we put each rental property into a separate land trust. That is, if it's 1 to 4 dwelling units, we can put it into a land trust even if there's a mortgage on it and the lender can't call the loan due. So each investment property goes into a land trust, and because rental property falls into a different tax category than does personal residences, we have an LLC as the beneficiary of each land trust. That way you have privacy of ownership with a land trust, and then you have the asset protection and lawsuit protection that a limited liability company can give you. Now, how do you protect the equity in that property itself if there's a slip and fall on the property itself? What we do is we take your international LLC, like we did with your personal residence, and we record an equity stripping line of credit mortgage against the property to make it look to the outside world like it is mortgaged to the hilt and there's nothing left to take. If we need to get a third-party lender involved who can purchase that mortgage, we put the proceeds into your offshore trust. We have your home in a land trust. We have rental property, rental property, rental property, rental property, each in separate land trusts, and then separate LLCs are the beneficiaries of those land trusts. Why separate LLCs? Because if there's a lawsuit on this property right here, we don't want all of the rest of these properties to fall like a bunch of dominoes. That's why we separate the ownership of the properties into separate LLCs, so you have walls between each particular property if there's liability on any one property. And again, we take the international LLC and record equity stripping line of credit mortgages against each property, and we get a third-party lender who can purchase those mortgages down the road if needed and put the proceeds into your international trust. Okay, now since we talked about things like airplanes and boats and cars and luxury items, what do we do with those things? Well, if it has a title, such as an automobile, we'll typically stick that into a title holding trust. Airplanes will stick into separate title holding trusts, and we'll record equity stripping line of credit liens, such as UCC1 liens, against each of these assets. If you own a business, we record a UCC1 lien against the business itself and all of its assets. If we need to, we can get a third-party lender to buy the UCC1 and stick the proceeds in a you can't touch it account in your international trust. Now, when we stick that money in the international trust, it isn't money you can go run off and spend because that would be too risky to the lender. What it does is it encumbers these assets, your airplane, your houses, your rental property, and when somebody looks at that asset as something they can take to satisfy judgment, they'll see there is nothing left. And so what happens in most cases, if somebody gets started early, is a lawsuit will simply drop. People will drop the lawsuit. When people see there's no pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, many of these lawsuits drop midway. But even if they do go all the way to get a judgment, your creditor will get nothing. At least that's the goal of asset protection and what we have been able to achieve for thousands of clients as the largest asset protection company in the nation. Now, one of the biggest myths is that you only need asset protection after a lawsuit happens. Well, that's a recipe for disaster many times. Now, there are ways to protect yourself after a lawsuit strikes. Asset protection is best done if you do it before the threat arises. Think of it like insurance. You buy it when everything's calm, not during a storm. So here's the secret. Asset protection is not a one-size-fits-all solution. The best strategies are layered and diversified. Think of it like building a castle. You don't just have a moat and you have walls, guards, and escape tunnels. In the asset protection world, these layers could be things like LLCs, trusts, equity stripping liens, and so on. For example, let's say you own multiple properties. Setting up an LLC or limited liability company for each property can shield you, along with a land trust for privacy of ownership. It also enables you to move the property into the LLC without triggering a due on sale clause. What we do is we set up the trust with you as beneficiary, then we have a separate piece of paper assigning your beneficial interest to the LLC for each property, and that's how it shields you. If somebody sues you over one property, they're prevented from going after your personal assets or the other property. And then there's the offshore component. Trust me, this is where the big players come in. That's why we talked about the Cook Islands Trust a moment ago. This is one of the most powerful asset protection tools available. Why? Because it's offshore, far away from the U.S. jurisdiction. If somebody sues you in the States, they can't just just waltz into the Cook Islands and grab your assets. Cook Islands laws are specifically designed to protect your assets from creditors, and here's the kicker. There's a statute of limitations. If somebody tries to go after your trust, they have to do it within a very short time frame, and proving fraudulent transfer is nearly impossible under their laws. And that's why the world's wealthiest people have some or most of their assets protected through offshore trusts. It's like putting your money into a vault where nobody can touch it. In fact, I've seen this firsthand many times. One client, a successful surgeon, was sued for malpractice. He had millions at stake, but because he had already set up an offshore trust, none of his personal assets could be touched. He walked away with his wealth intact, while others in similar situations lost everything. Another client, an entrepreneur with a $20 million business, had his assets spread across multiple LLCs and an offshore trust, and when his business was hit with a lawsuit, the judgment creditor walked away with nothing because everything was legally untouchable. So how do you protect your wealth? The first step is to assess your assets. What do you own that could be vulnerable to a lawsuit? And the second step is to diversify. Don't put all of your assets under one roof. Use LLCs and trusts, offshore trust strategies to spread the risk. And finally, work with professionals, such as those of us at Asset Protection Planners, because asset protection is complicated. That's why we have lawyers on staff and financial advisors on our team who specialize in protecting high net worth individuals like you. This is not a DIY project. You wouldn't perform your own surgery, right? Well, asset protection is pretty much the same. It requires precision and expertise. After all, you're working with an opponent who wants to poke holes in your strategies, and that's why you want to make sure to work with a professional that doesn't allow those holes to exist. And if you're not protected, you're exposed. In today's lawsuit-happy world, exposure means risk. If you want to ensure that everything you've worked so hard for is yours, start building your asset protection fortress today. So hit that subscribe button for more life-changing strategies to protect and grow your wealth. Share this video with somebody who needs to hear it. And remember, the best time to start is now, because when the lawsuit hits, it's already too late in most cases. We'll see you next time. This is The Business Guy.